Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. So let's get started and look into the first article. The first article of discussion is about Ayodhya Dispute. What is the context? The Supreme Court has referred the politically sensitive case of Ayodhya for mediation and has appointed retired Supreme Court Judge FMI Khalifullah. He will be heading this particular panel and will be assisted by two other panelists. So another panelist is Sriram Panchu, who happens to be a senior advocate at the Madras High Court. He was also appointed by the Supreme Court previously to mediate a 500 square kilometer dispute between Assam and Nagaland. Another person of repute is also in the panel, and that is Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who happens to be a spiritual leader and has been attempting mediation in the case for some time now. So what is the context of this article? These three people will be coming up and bringing all the stakeholders under the Ayodhya dispute on a common platform and will bring about a resolution to it in order to make sure that this particular case is resolved. So what we have to understand under this pretext is there are certain details that this article goes about discussing. The Supreme Court has ordered that all these mediation proceedings will be happening right in front of the camera in Faizabad in Uttar Pradesh, where all stakeholders who are involved in the case will be coming up, having the negotiations, having the discussions in front of this panel. So this particular panel will sort the views of all the parties that are involved, and this particular invocation has been taken up by the Supreme Court by using one of the sections of the CPC, and that is section 89 of the Civil Procedure Code. This section 89 of the Civil Procedure Code has been invoked by the Supreme Court, where it speaks about the settlement of disputes outside the court. So what is this section? This particular section says where it appears to the court that there exist elements of a settlement which may be acceptable to all parties, the court shall formulate the terms of the settlement and give them to the parties for their observations, and after receiving the observations of the parties, the court may reformulate the terms for a possible settlement and refer the same for arbitration, conciliation, judicial settlement, including settlement through the Lok Adalat and mediation. So how was the Supreme Court able to convince it? Is using a particular section of the CPC, and through this particular section it has devolved the powers to this mediation panel, where the Supreme Court has laid certain framework and rules, and all stakeholders will be voicing their opinion, and the panel will try to convince these people to bring an end to the Ayodhya dispute, which has been dragged on from the year 1992. Stressing this particular need for utmost confidentiality, it has also requested the media not to vitiate the environment by refraining themselves from reporting the proceedings. So the Supreme Court here has also requested the media not to telecast these proceedings so that peace will be at stake. This can vitiate the environment and there will be social fabric that will be disturbed. So it has requested all media outlets not to telecast all those proceedings that have been happening in the mediation center. Now that we have understood what the background is, this particular article under the editorial also speaks about certain concerns. Let's discuss some of the concerns that have been voiced in this article. For mediation, all parties to that particular dispute should agree for the future course of action. So there are a number of stakeholders who are involved in this particular Ayodhya dispute. These are the Hindus, the Muslims, as well as other stakeholders who are also involved as well. So for a mediation, all these parties will have to come up together. They will have to give an yes from their side, and they should involve for the future course of action. But when we look into this particular case in picture, there are certain Hindu petitioners who are not happy with it. They do not want the present mediation case to continue. Instead, they want the Supreme Court to go ahead and give their judgment. So what we see in this particular mediation is that the Supreme Court has forced upon a mediation where the mediation is not espoused by a particular Hindu entity. So what we have to understand under this particular backdrop is that mediation may not go anywhere, and what we will end up is in a deadlock. So this particular deadlock will eventually lead to further delay in the proceedings, and ultimately what will happen is it will come back to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have to deliver the justice. So what is the key concern here? The key concern is that the mediation has been forced by the Supreme Court, where one of the stakeholder is not happy with it, because mediation requires consensus, and consensus is missing under this particular mediation. Next important point that we have to understand here is it is not that this particular mediation is happening for the first time. Even previously there have been number of panelists that have been set up. This particular panel has also collapsed previously. Let's take the example of a 3-judge bench of the Lucknow bench of the Allahabad High Court, which had tried the same route of mediation, but this particular process had collapsed. The only difference that we see under the current mediation center is that this is a court monitored, and there would also be a form of censorship in the reporting of the proceedings. So what are the various concerns that have been voiced? There have been disagreement from few stakeholders. They want the Supreme Court to conduct this particular proceedings. That is not being done. Because of this, it goes to the mediation. There will be a lot of deadlock because this has happened in the past as well, and ultimately leading to delay in the judgment by the Supreme Court. What we have to further understand is it is not clear how these 5 judges of the Constitution bench decided that these are the 3 people who should be conducting this particular mediation. On what basis were these people selected? On what are the issues that these people have resolved earlier? So what is the criteria that this particular 5-judge Constitution bench have taken up in order to make sure that these are the people who will be acting as the mediators? Another point of concern is all these 3 people on the panel are men. What about the women? Do the women have not rights in this particular panel? Why is that a woman is not also included? So on one side there is a question of criteria, on the other side there is a question as to why the woman is not represented in the panel. When we looked into the criteria for the panelists, we questioned the way that these people were selected. However, what we also have to understand is that these are the people of eminence. When we look into the chairman, Justice M. Khalifullah has served with distinction on the Supreme Court. Sriram Panchu is a senior advocate who has pioneered mediation as an alternative dispute resolution mechanism in the country and has been able to solve problems in the earlier such scenarios. And when we speak of Sri Ravi Shankar, he has played a key role in the Colombian peace process, where issue of civil war had persisted for about 5 decades between the Colombian government as well as the rebel group in Colombia. So these are the people who are of eminence. They have reputation behind them, and these are the people who solved problems in the past. That's the prime reason as to why they are in this particular panel, and that's the prime reason as to why these people are there in the mediation panel. So any question of their credibility will not picture in. Another important point is there have been number of panels that have been set in the past as well. There have been panels which looked into mediation number of times, but things have been tried before as well. But there is no harm in trying the same principle, but now with a different set of people with different set of objectives and new outlook to it. Yes, we have appointed panels in the past, but this panel may not have been a fruitful exercise. But now we have a new panel with new outlook and new objectives to it. These people may try their heart out, so something can be worked out is just an aspiration that the Supreme Court is looking for. This dispute is not only about land, but it is about religion and emotions. Human needs and emotions are at the heart of the interest. Mediation in this particular case needs to identify, express and discuss all needs and emotions which lie at the art of the dispute, which will have to be respected and negotiated. So what we have to understand here is there is lot of emotions in this particular case, there is lot of values that have been added in this particular case, and this will require people with sympathy, empathy and compassion, and all these people have showed that in the past, and that is why they are on the panel. And such matters which is not only dealing with land dispute but also about religion will need certain emotions to be added, and that is why we need to give it a try to make sure that this can be a possibility of dispute resolution, is what this article all about. So moving on, let's look into the next article. This article says only 3.32 lakh MSME jobs created in last 4 years finds the CII survey. So what is the context? There was one of the surveys that was conducted by the CII. According to it, the number of new jobs that are created in the micro, small and medium enterprises sector in the last 4 years, it stood at about 3,32,394, which is just 13.9% higher than the base 4 years ago. There was also another survey that was conducted by the Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises, which shows that there was about 11,54,293 MSME jobs which were created in 3 years that ended at 2014 and 15. So when we look into these two surveys and when we juxtapose together and when you compare, what you will see is there is a pale comparison. There is contrast within these surveys. On one side, the government says the increase in the number of jobs that are created, but on the other side, the survey has gone about saying that the impact has not been so much, but it is only less number of jobs that are created, and the increase has just been about 13.9%. This article further gives us certain statistics. It says under the micro enterprises is the largest job generator and has created about 2,40,713 jobs. That amounts to about 73% of the net jobs. So what is the net jobs that we are speaking about? The net jobs here basically means the number of people who are recruited into that particular organization, and these are the people who are employed in that organization, but the number of people who are exiting is comparatively less. So the net jobs basically means the number of people who are recruited less the number of exits. So under this small enterprises, it has accounted for about 23% of the net jobs that have been created, and under the medium enterprises, it accounts for about 4%. On the sectoral breakup, it further says hospitality and tourism sector accounted for 12% of the jobs, textiles and apparels and metal product sectors each contributed to about 8% of the job, machinery parts to about 7%, transport and logistics to about 7%. This particular survey further says that Maharashtra, Gujarat and Telangana accounted for over 50% of the jobs that are created in this period. So what we have to understand here is that there is a contrast between the government conducted survey and that which has been conducted by the CII. Another important announcement is we already have a video for the MSME where the entire idea of what the MSME is, what are the various classifications, what are the advantages and disadvantages have all been discussed. So kindly look into it for the same. But with respect to this article, this is what we have to understand. So moving on, let's look into the next article. This article speaks about the Supreme Court order in reference to the Aravali. So let's try and understand what this article is all about. The Haryana Assembly on February 27 had passed the Punjab Land Preservation Haryana Amendment Bill 2019, which basically is amending the Punjab Land Preservation Act of 1900. This Punjab Land Preservation Act of 1900, when it was introduced, it provided for the conservation of the subsoil water. It wanted to make sure that there is no erosion in the Aravalis, and it also wanted to prevent the future course of erosion in this particular region of Aravali. So this Punjab Land Preservation Act basically dealt with subsoil water as well as prevention of erosion. So what this bill of Haryana government has basically done is it has opened up thousands of acres of land to the real estate as well as non-forest activity in the area that was protected under this Act of Punjab Land Preservation Act. By coming up with this particular bill opens out the protective cover that was provided to the Aravalis as well as the Shivaliks, exposing nearly 28,000 acres of forest land to the private builders as well as the land sharks. So in order to understand this article, there is also another judgment that was passed by the Supreme Court in 2018, where the apex court went about saying that all these type of illegal activities is very frightening. The illegal construction in the forest areas is very frightening, and it has also requested the Haryana government to demolish all the unauthorized structures that were built post August 1992. In spite of the Supreme Court order in 2018, the Haryana government did not pay heed to it and has currently come up with this particular bill of Punjab Land Preservation Haryana Amendment Bill 2019 to open the floodgates for the private sector as well as the land mafia, where this will have rampant construction and ultimately causing destruction to the Aravalis. In order to understand what this Aravalis is, what is the background, kindly visit the 12 September 2018 under the second topic, where we have discussed in detail about the geographical aspect as well. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. Moving on, let's look into the next article. This article basically speaks about the forest survey. The first thing that we have to understand is the definition of the forest cover. The Forest Survey of India employs the satellite imagery to estimate the forest cover. So what does this forest cover basically mean? It includes all those lands which are more than 1 hectare in area with a tree canopy of more than 10% irrespective of the land use, ownership and legal status. What this means is that all those private plantations like the tea, the rubber, the coffee, etc. will also be included under the forest cover if they have more than 1 hectare in size with a tree canopy of about 10%. So there is a definitional flaw in the forest cover. So what is the background? The Forest Survey of India, using the satellite imagery, comes up with the forest cover. What is the forest cover? It includes all those lands which are more than 1 hectare in area with a tree canopy of more than 10% irrespective of the land use, ownership and the legal status. So what is the current status that the government is looking into? When we look into the current status, the government counts all those forests as well as the plantations towards estimating the portion of India's geographical area covered under the forest. So when you say it is forest, it currently includes the forest area exclusively and also those plantation areas which involves the tea, the coffee, the rubber and so on. So it does not bifurcate the forest area explicitly, but it also includes the forest as well as the plantation area. So what this particular article under the present context speaks about is, there was one of the high power committee that was constituted by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. This particular high committee has gone about saying that there is a forest area. This forest areas which is exclusive in domain has to be bifurcated and plantations will have to be bifurcated, and all those areas will have to be explicitly demarcated to show that there is forest area which is completely explicit and there is also plantations and private lands which have to be demarcated. So what this high level committee has gone about saying is, when we look into the current status, the private lands and the forest come up together, but this high level committee has asked for a demarcation of the private lands and plantations separately away from the forest area. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So this article speaks about RBI allows white label ATM entities to buy cash. So even before we understand what this article is all about, we will have to understand what white label ATMs are. Automated teller machines, or what is called as ATMs, are those type of machines where we would be able to access and get the money from. This provides the financial and non-financial transactions without the need of physically going up to a bank branch. The ATMs have expanded the scope of banking to anytime, anywhere banking through interoperable platforms. So cards issued by one bank can be operated through ATMs set up by other banks as well. Earlier, only banks were permitted by the Reserve Bank of India to set up ATMs. However, ATMs have become the means of financial inclusion and have been leveraged for delivery of wide variety of banking services to the customers. And all these banks which are given permission by the RBIs set up their ATMs in tier 1 as well as tier 2 cities. But what we have to understand is these ATMs are also part of the financial inclusion. This will also have to be started in the rural segment, in the tier 3 as well as the tier 4 segments. In order to overcome this lacunae, in order to overcome this dearth area, RBI came up with a new set of ATMs, and that is the white label ATMs. So what are these white label ATMs? When there is a particular bank, this bank setting up its own ATMs, this is called as a normal process of banking. But there is an automated teller machine or the ATM which is set up, owned and operated by a non-bank entities. Such ATMs are called as the white label ATMs. In case the SBI sets up something on its own, this is part of the normal banking. But let's say for example, the Tata Communication Payments Solution Limited, the first company authorized by the Reserve Bank of India to open white label ATMs in the country in case there is a private organization which is not a bank but it opens an ATM. Such ATM is what is called as the white label ATM. So this is not a banking entity. This does not have transactions. Its core idea is not about banking. But if such private organization comes up and opens a particular ATM, such ATM is what is called as the white label ATM. The first white label ATM was launched under the brand name which is called as IndiCash in the year 2013. Next, what we have to understand is who can operate this particular white label ATM. So any non-bank entities which are incorporated in India under the Companies Act are allowed to operate the white label ATMs. So all those non-bank entities who are permitted to set up the white label ATMs in India after due authorization from the RBI under the Payment and Settlement Systems Act of 2007. All these non-bank entities will also have to have a minimum net of about 100 crores as per the latest financial year's audited balance sheet, which is to be maintained at all times. So what we have to understand here is any private entity which is a non-bank entity, if it is able to meet these parameters of registration under Companies Act, after getting due licensing from the RBI under the Payment and Settlement Systems Act and also has a minimum net worth of 100 crores, they would be able to start this white label ATM in all cities as well as in tier 3 as well as the tier 4 cities. Next important point is how is that these people would be able to generate money because of it. What is the advantage of these people coming up with this white label ATMs? So what are the advantages of running this particular white label ATM? The white label ATM operator is entitled to receive a particular fee. So he will receive this particular fee from that particular bank through which the transaction has happened. Let's say for example, I am a SBI card holder. So I happen to go and insert this particular card in the white label ATM of let's say the IndiCash of Tata. So the minute the transaction is done, SBI will pay certain commission to IndiCash. So there is certain commission amount that IndiCash, that is Tata, is expecting from SBI. So there is a fee that IndiCash collects after every transaction. Next important point is these white label ATMs are not allowed to charge any amount from the customer because they are getting fee from the SBI or with respect to that relevant bank. They will not be able to charge any amount from the customer. Acceptance of deposits under the white label ATMs is again not permitted, but all those white label ATM operators are permitted to display the advertisements, and through these advertisements can offer other value added services through the regulations that have been enforced from time to time, and through these advertisements they'll still be able to get and generate enough revenue for themselves. Let's say there is an ATM, this ATM has certain advertisements. Through these advertisements that have been planted in that particular center, they will still be able to generate some revenue is what the monetary benefits are. Next important point is, how does this white label ATM actually get its cash from? There is something called as the sponsor bank. Let's say there is this company called as the IndiCash. This IndiCash will enter into an agreement with certain sponsor banks. This sponsor bank can be any of the banks, so it has to enter into certain agreements with these banks. So it is this bank which will provide this particular money. Their people come up to this particular ATM, they check if this particular note is counterfeit or not. It is on these agreement that a particular sponsor bank will come up to this particular ATM and load the money into the ATM machine. So this cash management will happen on a due agreement that this particular private entity has entered into an agreement with the sponsor bank, and the sponsor bank personnel will come up and load the machine with the money. So what we have to understand here is that there have been number of major players apart from Tata, and that includes the AGS Transact Technologies, BTI Private Limited, Hitachi Private Limited, Muthoot Finance Limited, Riddhi Siddhi Bullions, SRI Infrastructure Finance Limited, Tata Communication Payment Solutions Limited, as well as Wankriji Limited. Another recent update is FDI for this particular white label ATM has been completely made 100% on the automatic route. So earlier what was required was the permission from the RBI as well as the Government of India. Currently all the private entities from foreign countries will also be able to make investment 100% without the permission of the Government of India. Next important point is, what are the challenges? So the major challenge when it comes to the white label ATMs is there is huge rent, and people also will have to be employed as security guards, and salaries will also have to be given to them. So the major investment is, on one side there is infrastructure, on the other side the security guards will also have to be paid their salaries. The next important point is, let's say for example there are transactions that happens in an ATM. On an average, only if there are about 75, 80, 85, 90 and so on, more the transactions, more will be the fee that has been paid by that particular bank. When we look into the city situations, the number of people who are going up to the ATMs have comparatively reduced. With number of people reduced visiting the ATMs, the fee that they generate from the banks are also less. So on one side they'll have to pay exorbitant rents, and they'll also have to employ security guards, pay them their salaries, but the fee that they generate through these banks is comparatively less. Why? Because the transactions that are happening on the daily basis is comparatively less, and people in the city are not visiting these ATMs at the lower level. There have been number of applications that have been developed. Let's say for example the Paytm, or let's say there is PhonePe. With the onslaught of these number of applications, what we also see is number of people visiting the ATMs are also less. If people are not visiting these centers, the amount or the fee that the bank pays to these ATMs will also reduce. Another key argument is, apart from these white label ATMs, there are also ATMs that have been set up by the banks themselves. So there is lot of competition. Let's say for example I am a person holding an SBI card. I would have that in mind that I'll have to go to an SBI ATM machine, or let's say if I am holding an ICICI card, there is always this tendency that I usually go to an ICICI bank ATM machine. So in this particular background, there is lot of competition that these white label ATMs feel, and because the number of transactions again are less, the fee paid by this particular bank will also reduce. So these are the challenges that we see when it comes to the white label ATMs. But what this article currently speaks about is, in order to boost the activities of white label automated teller machines, the RBI has allowed such entities to buy wholesale cash above a threshold of 1 lakh pieces of any denomination directly from the RBI and also from the regional rural banks. When we looked into the sponsor banks, what we had was that there was an agreement with respect to the sponsor bank, but now the RBI has opened up further windows, and it has also said that these white label ATMs will be able to take money directly from the RBI and also from the regional rural banks. What it has further gone on to say is that there are certain guidelines that all bank ATMs will have to follow in terms of the safeguards, in terms of the standards, in terms of the control measures which are applicable to all banks relating to currency handling as well as the cyber security. This is further amplified and further strengthened for the white label ATMs. So all those rules that have been enforced for those type of banking entities will also be same for the non-banking entities. Apart from this, the operators can still display the advertisement pertaining to non-financial products anywhere in the white label ATM premises, including the white label ATM screen, except the main signboard. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. Moving on, let's look into other articles. This article, a peace movement is needed. This is something to do with India and Pakistan relationship. We have discussed n number of times. There is nothing much new to it, so we are neglecting this article. And this is another article which is political in nature, and this is also avoided. So moving on, let's look into some of the prelims practice questions. Consider the following statements about National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. It comes under the Ministry of Health. It is entrusted with the task of recovering amounts overcharged by the manufacturer. Which of the above statements are correct? The answer for this is 2 only. Why? Because it does not come under the Ministry of Health, but it comes under the Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers. Why have we taken this article? That is because there was an article on newspaper which says cancer drugs 87% cheaper after trade margin cap. This is in relevance to the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. That is why it becomes very important. So moving on, let's look into the map based question. Sulawesi Island recently seen in news is in Indonesia. Why have we picked this up? Is because there is an article which says that scientists have discovered beetle species in Indonesia, and that happens to be in the island of Sulawesi. What we also have to understand here is that there have been certain insects that have been found, and they have been named after the Star Wars character Yoda, while 3 species were also named after Asterix, Obelix as well as Idelix. So this particular beetle species have got these new names is what this article all about. Moving on, let's look into the previous year question paper. With reference to Changpa community of India, consider the following statements. They live mainly in the state of Uttarakhand. This is a wrong statement. They live in Jammu and Kashmir. The rare Pashmina goats that yield a fine wool. Yes, this is right. They are kept in the category of scheduled tribes. Yes, this is right. So the answer for this is 2 and 3 only. Moving on, let's look into the mains practice question. It says Supreme Court has ordered for the mediation to settle the long-running Ayodhya Ram Mandir Babri Masjid dispute. In this context, write a note on the dispute with possible solutions. We have already discussed this, so kindly write all your answers on the comment section so that we can give relevant feedback for the same. In case you have liked our initiative, want to encourage us more, please like and comment on our comment section and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.